Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam.
And I'm Marcia.
And we like World War II media, and we want to talk about it. Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we are talking about the classic film Casablanca. It came out in 1942. It was directed by Michael Curtiz, written by Julius J. Epstein, Philip G. Epstein, and Howard Koch. It's based on an unproduced play called Everybody Comes to Rick's by Murray Burnett and Joan Allison, and it was nominated for 8 Academy Awards and won 3, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Screenplay. What did you think of this movie?
I love this one. I really enjoyed this movie. I actually bought it after I watched it, so that should be a recommendation in itself. I thought it was really funny. I specifically like Rick because he's kind of miserable, and I like that about him. I thought the humor was nice. I enjoyed the old Hollywood of it, basically just the glamour shots, and I really enjoyed getting all the references that I've heard my entire life and I have never known what they are from. And now here they are. So I did quite enjoy this movie. How about you?
Yeah, like so many quotes were said in this movie, and I was like, oh my God, that's where that's from. I feel like a bit silly for not having seen it before now because it is such a classic and everyone talks about it. And it's just obviously a towering film in American cinema. And once you see it, you can kind of see how it became almost like an inspiration for a lot of elements that appeared in later films. But yeah, I did enjoy my watching experience. I understand why people like it so much. I thought that the setting of it is kind of fun to look at in the 21st century because it's such an Orientalist view of Morocco. You can tell it was filmed on, a soundstage in California. There's no actual Moroccans in it anywhere to be found. It's a story about Europeans and Americans set in Morocco, ostensibly. So it's a little old-fashioned in that respect. But yeah, overall enjoyable. I did like it. I thought it was fun.
I also was quite surprised that it wasn't in any way slow because not a lot happens and you're in the same space quite a lot of the time, but it doesn't make it boring. So I thought it was good.
I believe the stage play takes place entirely inside of Rick's Cafe.
Yeah, that makes sense. But like Stalag 17, which was also based on a play, this didn't feel so much as a play to me. So it must have been rewritten a bit better than Stalag 17 was.
Yeah, for people not super familiar with the story, it's basically like a love triangle featuring, the sort of exotic characters you would expect to find in Casablanca during World War II, people fleeing persecution in Europe and shady Americans and lots of intrigue. So yeah, they did manage to do a good job translating it from play to screen.
Yeah. Also, I feel like I have to mention this because we know how much I love not the old Hollywood kissing, and it was very much present in this movie.
The face sucking?
Yes. And also, I feel like they don't move their faces. So it's like they glomp and then they don't move.
Well, I think because of the Hays Code and all the other sort of requirements that were and restrictions that were put on movies back then, I don't think they're allowed to like kiss with tongue or anything like that. So if they want to show a passionate kiss, they just sort of have to mash their faces together.
Yeah, there were quite a couple kisses in this. And also, I like that the female character in this isn't necessarily waiting for a man to be her savior. I did quite like it.
Yeah, we always like when there's a female character that isn't a hat rack. I mean, yes. I guess you could argue that really the catalysts for most of the action are the 2 men on either side of her, so which is perhaps not ideal. But yeah, I mean, she does have agency of her own to a degree.
Yes. So let's get into the movie.
So we get an opening card over a map, which says, with the coming of the Second World War, many eyes in imprisoned Europe turn hopefully or desperately toward the freedom of the Americas. Lisbon became the embarkation point, but not everybody could get to Lisbon directly. And so a tortuous roundabout refugee trail sprang up. Paris to Marseille, across the Mediterranean to Oran, then by train or auto or on foot across the rim of Africa to Casablanca and French Morocco. Here, the fortunate ones, through money or influence or luck, might obtain exit visas and scurry to Lisbon, and from Lisbon to the New World. But the others wait in Casablanca, and wait, and wait, and wait.
Yes, good opening for me.
Yeah, I made a quick note here just to give a bit more context. Casablanca is the largest city in Morocco, and it's also the largest African port on the Atlantic. So you can imagine the strategic value it would have had. The Vichy French government had ordered French colonial troops to defend French territory against aggressors, presumably allied because they had an armistice with the Nazis. The French colonists in Morocco tended to support the Vichy puppet regime, while the native Moroccans tended to favor the Free French under Charles de Gaulle. The city was indeed a haven for refugees during the war. These would have been primarily middle and upper class European Jews and anti-fascist intellectuals who could afford to get there. And countries like the US and Canada had very restrictive visa policies in place. So some of these refugees were stuck there for a long time. And it reached a point where the Vichy French government started moving them to internment camps. And after the release of the movie Casablanca, Warner Brothers actually gave 500,000 francs, which is $9,000, to a Jewish humanitarian organization to help them free refugees from internment camps and help them to find housing and work in Morocco while they waited for visas or they waited for the war to be over so they could go home, etc.
I feel like $9,000 back then was quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's not nothing, and they weren't really obligated to give anything, I suppose.
Yeah, I do wonder when Hollywood became evil, because this sounds nice for them to do.
It is, but also, if you think about in the movie, there is no reference to Jewish people or the persecution of the Jews in Europe. I mean, we see that there are people fleeing persecution, but they don't really say why. And, you know, this is because it was made in 1940s Hollywood.
Yeah. And also early in the 1940s, too. I wonder if it would be different if it was made later in the 40s. Maybe.
Yeah.
So we are in December of 1941 in Casablanca. 2 German couriers have been killed, and the letters of transit they were carrying were stolen. The police are using it as an excuse to round up undesirable people. And these transit letters are what you need to be able to get out of Casablanca. Yeah,
they are effectively just a plot device. There would not have been letters of transit signed by Charles de Gaulle in real life that were unquestionable and would allow anyone to leave. It would not have really been a thing. But it is true that for refugees, they did have to work through an absolute barrage of paperwork, visas and passports and documents and permits and all that kind of stuff to be allowed to leave. So it makes sense that they would invent this for the movie.
I did see some similarities between like the set design of this and Allied, which has a little bit in Casablanca. So I thought, this looks familiar, but I guess they must have modeled Allied after this a little bit.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, yeah, this is a pretty famous movie, I guess.
Yeah.
I did find, because I wasn't super familiar with the plot of Casablanca, watching the opening scene, I really wasn't sure. I was like, is one of the main characters here? Like, I had a hard time sort of glomming on and figuring out what they were trying to set up for, I guess. I don't know, just me maybe?
No, not just you, also me. But yeah, I think I was just so excited to be finally watching this movie that I was like, all right, I'll just go with it and I'll see where we end up. And I knew it was going to be a romance, but also it doesn't really feel like a World War II movie a lot, but it is.
Yeah, definitely. So we meet American Rick Blaine, played by Humphrey Bogart. He owns a gambling club and professes to be neutral in all matters, thus attracting clientele from all sides. So he's got Germans in there, he's got French police in there, he's got criminals in there, he's got all kinds. A local criminal, Ugarte, reveals to Rick that he has the stolen letters of transit, and he asks Rick to hold on to them for him because he's trying to find a buyer, but obviously they're pretty hot property at the moment. And then moments later, Ugarte is arrested and later killed.
Yeah, Rick kind of gives him up a bit. He's like, Rick, please help me get out of here. And then he just is like, nope, I'm staying out of this.
Yeah, Rick's whole thing is that he doesn't stick his neck out for anybody.
Exactly.
Which is, a bit of foreshadowing of a character arc.
Yes.
And Rick's the Cafe is supposedly based on a movie theater in Tangier, Morocco called Cinema Vox. It had 2,000 seats and a retractable roof, and it was sort of a center of Moroccan cinema where all the movers and shakers would go.
That sounds really cool. I would like to go there, please. I wonder if it still exists. Major Heinrich Strasser, played by Conrad Veidt, is hosted at the bar by Captain Louis Renault, played by Claude Rains, the local French official. He's come to hunt down resistance fighter Victor Laszlo, played by Paul Henreid, who has escaped from a concentration camp.
Yeah, interestingly, Conrad Veidt, who plays the big Nazi bad guy in this movie, he had actually fled Germany before the war because his wife was Jewish. And quite a few of the minor roles in this movie are also acted by refugees from Europe. You know, a lot of those like European accents that you're hearing are authentic. And a lot of the emotion that you see from these people is authentic. So I thought that was really interesting.
I only now just realized how kind of special it is to have a movie like this come out in 1942 when the war's still ongoing. It's pretty brazen of them to just put this movie out.
Yeah. I mean, for sure, right? They definitely didn't know how the war was going to end at this point. It's pretty early days.
Yep. And they're also pretty much the same. Well, I guess they're American, so that makes sense. But they're setting up the Germans to be specifically very, very evil.
Yeah. Victor and his wife, Ilse Lund, played by the luminous Ingrid Bergman, gorgeous. They enter Rick's bar and immediately have a tense conversation with Renault and Strasser. Victor is technically safe here on French soil, but his situation is very tenuous, as you can imagine. The French are ostensibly neutral, but they are very much cooperating with the Germans. Rick and Renault have actually already made a bet that Victor won't make it out of Casablanca.
Yeah, Renault is one of my favorite characters in this movie. I thought he was hilariously funny without intending to be, I think. I just thought this character, this French, very typically French, kind of playing both sides official, is really quite funny to see. And Rick is also just very funny.
Yeah. For sure. I like the little back and forth that Rick and Renault have. Like, in some ways, I think their relationship is one of the more interesting ones in the movie.
Yes.
I did really laugh at the part where Renault clears out the casino because there's gambling here. And then at the same moment, someone runs up and they're like, "Oh, Mr. Renault, here are your winnings." And he's like, "Thank you." And then he continues clearing out the casino because there's gambling here.
And I also thought it was funny that you just called Ingrid Bergman luminous, because that's what this movie does. The women are just lit up beautifully, like absolutely gorgeous.
They love to put that soft filter on them in the old movies, you know?
Yeah, and they do it to the men too, but you can't really get Humphrey Bogart to look smooth.
You know what else I thought? I definitely mentioned this to you offline, but in the movie, Humphrey Bogart looks like a big dude, in my opinion. I don't know if it's just his presence or if the other actors are short, but in real life, he was only like 5'8". So they were definitely putting him on a box or something next to Ingrid Bergman.
Yes, I feel like everybody in this movie looks pretty except for Humphrey Bogart, because he just is not pretty.
You know
what? He is charming, I'll say that.
He is charming. Yeah, I also don't know if I don't know if he's like the best actor of all time. I'm not saying he's bad, but I'm also just saying like he's maybe not like the highlight of the movie for me personally, but I agree with you that his character is kind of like a lovable grump.
I would probably pick Victor Laszlo over Rick any day.
Yeah, I mean, Victor Laszlo is like the romantic resistance fighter. He's very selfless. He wants his wife to survive at all costs. And like Rick is just the crotchety, mysterious American who's grumpy all the time and doesn't stick his neck out for nobody, but you know he has a heart of gold. So they're very like foils of each other. But I mean, I do feel like this is the classic, oh, well, you know, in real life, any woman would choose Victor Laszlo, right? But in the movie, it's just like, oh, well, she's in love with Rick and his secret heart of gold. Well, whatever.
He also recognizes the piano player Sam, played by Dooley Wilson, and requests that he plays as time goes by. And there is a famous quote in this bit, because people say, "Play it again, Sam." But it's actually "played once, Sam." Rick flips out because he's asked Sam to never play that song. And he comes over because he hears it, and then he spots Ilse. And we find out that she has left him before the two of them were to leave Paris, and he doesn't quite know why she's left him. And that night, after closing, Sam plays the song again, and we see some flashbacks of happier days for Rick and Elsa in Paris. And there's another famous quote, which is,
"Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine."
These quotes are so good.
They are really good. And it's just like, I don't know, you've heard that in so many contexts before. And then you watch this movie and you're like, oh my God, is this movie like the originator of every famous quote?
And there's also another one that's, are those cannons I hear, or is my heart pounding really fast? Or something like that.
You're right, Elsa says that one.
Yeah, is that cannon fire, or is my heart pounding?
Yeah. Oh man. Well, we see Rick's softer side as he helps a young couple win enough money to buy a visa. Both of the actors who play, I believe one of the actors, the person who plays the young woman, was like the niece of a studio exec or something like that. And then the man in the couple was actually one of the actors who had been a refugee from pre-war Europe. And we also hear that Rick fought on the Loyalist side during the Spanish Civil War. So obviously that was from 1936 to 1939 when the democratically elected sort of left-leaning government of Spain lost to Francisco Franco's fascists. And we also learned that Rick ran guns in Ethiopia in 1935. And so at the end of the 19th century, the Italians had invaded Ethiopia. They got their asses kicked. So they came back in 1935. They invaded again. This time they committed what amounts to a genocide. They killed like hundreds of thousands of civilians so that they could take over Ethiopia and use it as a colony. And so we know that Rick's got anti-fascist cred because he fought for the Loyalists and he ran guns for the Ethiopians.
What does it mean to run guns? Is that just being a courier?
Yeah, effectively. So he would have smuggled guns into the country.
Cool. I didn't know this. Thanks.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why the Ethiopians ended up losing to the Italians was because they were outgunned in many ways. Although I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they did also get guns from the Germans because this was a pre-war period of time where Germany wasn't very happy about the Italians acting in ways that the Germans didn't approve of. They wanted the Italians to do certain things and the Italians were not doing those things. So I believe the Germans also tried to help the Ethiopians. But yeah, Laszlo discovers that Rick has these letters that have been stolen, but Rick won't sell them to him. And Laszlo's like, well, like, why won't you sell them to me? And he's like, ask your wife. Very dramatic. Renault and Strasser also strongly suspect that Rick has the letters, and the police search the club, but they don't find anything. Strasser gets angry and he has Rick's club closed down when a group of French citizens drown out Die Wacht am Rhein, which is a patriotic German song with La Marseillaise. And you see all of the French people singing La Marseillaise are like all very crying and they're emotional. And it is because a lot of these actors were from countries that had been occupied by Germany.
I'm going to say the German bit again because I know German and you don't.
Go for it.
Yeah, the song is Die Wacht am Rhein, but it's a stupid patriotic German song, so we shall not mention it again. I did like this scene, to be honest, and this is when your funny bit with Renault comes up about gambling and his chips.
Yeah.
Ilsa comes to the deserted cafe later on, and she confronts Rick about the letters. She threatens him because she wants the letter. She uses an actual gun, guys, but then she admits she still loves him. The reason why she left him in Paris was that she believed that her husband, Victor, had been killed in a concentration camp. But she found out that he was still alive and he needed her help. So she stayed in Paris. She and Rick decide they will remain in Casablanca, while Victor uses the letters to get to safety.
Love triangle.
Very much. I'm going to be honest here. I didn't think they have great chemistry. By they, I mean Humphrey Bogart and the beautiful Ingrid.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. And I also maybe it's just me, but I'm just like, well, like I think in the stage play too, she didn't meet her husband until after, like this whole thing where she was married to Victor and then she thought he was dead and then she was dating Rick, but then Victor was alive. So she went back to him. They put that in the movie to spice it up, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I'm like, I don't know. Victor seems like a pretty swell guy. I don't know why you're fucking around with Rick behind the scenes.
Yeah, Victor did seem like a good guy. And to be honest, I thought Ilsa was kind of not the best character in the sense that she just could have been honest with him. But I guess that would have made for a very good movie. So I get why they did it.
Right. Victor shows up unexpectedly and Rick kind of like hustles Ilsa out so that Victor doesn't know that she was there. And he tries to encourage Rick to take the letters himself and take Ilsa to safety in America because it's like the selflessness Olympics, I guess. And Victor gets arrested by French police on a trumped up charge, which really feels like it was a matter of time. I mean, this whole premise where he's untouchable because this is technically still French soil and the Germans can't get him really just feels like, well, they probably would have just arrested him, right?
Yeah, I thought he was actually the actor who played Laszlo. He was playing it a little bit too cool. I thought he could have been a little bit more nervous about getting arrested, but he is kind of a cool, swashbuckling resistance guy, so I guess that's part of the character.
Yeah, and he has already spent some months in a concentration camp, so I guess that really toughens you up.
I guess it does. Rick goes to Renault and tells him that it would be much better to let Victor go so they can actually set him up on some better charges, namely the possession of the letters of transit. Rick says he's going to use the letters for himself and Ilsa. That afternoon, Rick sells his club and he prepares to leave Casablanca, so you can they're trying to make you think he's actually leaving.
Yeah. That night, as Rick is handing the letters to Laszlo, Renault comes out to arrest him, because of course it's a setup. But Rick pulls out a gun, and he holds the gun on Renault, makes him call the airport, but Renault pretends to call the airport, but he actually calls Strasser instead and alerts him to what's happening. So, they're all heading to the airport, but we know that the Germans are coming.
The Germans are coming. At the airport, Rick persuades Elsa to go with Victor, and there's another famous quote, "We'll always have Paris." And there's another one, which is my personal favorite. "Here's looking at you, kid."
Yeah. I was reading about this online, and apparently at the time, the motion picture production code actually forbade showing a woman leaving her husband for another man. So, I mean, I guess we're supposed to see the ending as a twist, but audiences at the time would have known that Ilsa wasn't really allowed to leave Victor for Rick in the movie.
And I also somehow already knew that he just wasn't gonna go because he seems to be the secret really good guy.
Yeah, they definitely dropped hints throughout the movie, and despite the fact that he keeps saying he doesn't stick his neck out for anybody, he does occasionally stick his neck out for people.
Yes.
As the plane takes off, Strasser arrives with all of his Nazi friends, but Rick shoots him before he can call the radio tower to stop the plane. Renault covers for Rick when the other police officers arrive, and he tells them to go start rounding up the usual suspects in the shooting of Strasser, just kind of like at the beginning where it's like, oh yeah, they always rustle up the same guys and interrogate them or whatever. And then Renault and Rick discuss plans to escape to another French colony, Brazzaville, which is a town or a city in modern day Congo. And there's another famous quote alert, which is, "I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship." Yes,
there are so many good quotes.
I did look up Brazzaville. It was established as actually the capital of Free France by Charles de Gaulle from 1940 to 1943. And there was a famous Brazzaville conference in 1944 where de Gaulle and other Free French politicians made concessions to the many French African colonies that had supported the Free French since the defeat of France by Germany, which was sort of a first step towards the decolonization and the disassembly of the French Empire. So it's kind of neat.
That is neat.
And also, I felt like the uncertain ending of the movie really reflects the uncertain ending of the war at this point. Like we see Rick and Renault kind of walk off into the fog, which also, would there have been a lot of fog in Morocco? Anyway. So they walk off into the fog, and the release of this film coincided with the Allied invasion of North Africa in 1942. So this is really kind of the beginning of the Americans getting really tangibly involved. And we know now, of course, the American forces captured Casablanca during Operation Torch in November of 1942, which was just a few months after this movie was made. And Casablanca later became the site of an airfield that was used as a staging area for all American aircraft in the ETO.
That's neat. I love when there's like these little tidbits of knowledge that you come up with.
Yeah, it was crazy because before the Americans had taken it over, when it was still a Vichy French territory, Hitler actually had plans to use the area around Casablanca to build all of these airfields. And he was going to use that as sort of the launching point for a potential attack on the United States.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good thing that didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, Hitler had a lot of grand plans. How possible all of them would have been is kind of debatable, but it's interesting to hear about them now.
Fair, yes. You have some more notes, and the next one is my absolute favorite thing ever. It's so funny.
Yeah. So this movie was obviously super famous, seen around the world. And Warner Brothers ended up releasing it in West Germany in 1952, but they heavily edited it. So they basically changed the whole premise. They took out all the scenes with Nazis in them. They took out most of the references to World War II. When they dubbed the dialogue into German, they just completely changed the plot. Basically, Victor Laszlo was no longer a resistance fighter who escaped from a Nazi concentration camp. They made him into a Norwegian atomic physicist who was being pursued by Interpol because he, quote unquote, broke out of jail. So, as you can imagine, the West German version was 25 minutes shorter than the original cut because they took out everything with the Nazis. And the Germans actually didn't get their original version of Casablanca until 1975.
I wonder what they did with Strasser then, because he's pretty much Nazi.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess if you're dubbing the dialogue into German, you can make him say whatever you want him to say.
But doesn't he also look quite Nazi officer?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what they did about the uniforms and that kind of stuff, but I mean,
it would be hilarious.
Yeah, it is fun, movies made in this era. Even when a couple of the movies that we watched before that were made kind of during the war, sometimes the execs would come in and be like, oh, well, we can't make the Germans look that bad, or, oh, we can't show this, or we can't show that, or we're not sure what's going to pan out with the Russians yet. So maybe, it's kind of interesting when you read about all that stuff.
Yep.
Casablanca is probably the most famous film about displacement caused by World War II, which I thought might be interesting to talk a little bit about because it is a romance, but I mean, at its core, it's a movie about refugees. And 65 million people were displaced in Europe alone during World War II. As you can imagine, there was many, many, many more than that across the world. Known as DPs or displaced persons, many of them ended up spending time in the hundreds of UN-run camps that existed. And in 1947, there were still almost 800 resettlement camps in existence. The legal definition of refugees that we still use today was born as a direct result of World War II displacement at the 1951 Refugee Convention. And Michael Curtiz, the director of Casablanca, was actually a Jewish refugee from Hungary who had come to the United States in the 1920s, as were many of the actors, as we've already discussed. And I just thought it was kind of interesting to see, first of all, a movie about that, which we don't necessarily get tons of, but also all of these refugees fleeing oppressive, occupying regimes in Europe. And then they come to a colonial country that has been occupied by a country in Europe. And they don't really seem to question that at all, to question whether that's correct or whatever. I don't know. I just thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, and also they are refugees in this movie, but it seems kind of almost a little bit glamorous in a way to be a refugee and to go to Rick's, and it's all, everyone's wearing pretty jewelry and it's like fancy and they're having drinks and it's a cocktail hour and they're gambling for money. So it's a pretty glamorous version of being a refugee, I guess. They do mention that only the fortunate ones who have money are able to get here in the first place. So
yeah, it's funny. The movie manages to be pretty diverse in terms of like European representation. There's people from all over Europe, but then, like I said at the beginning, we don't really see any native Moroccans that have any appreciable role in the movie. Yeah, it's just funny. They're all like, oh, it's so terrible that Germany occupied our country. Let's go to a country that France has occupied.
Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised that there is a black person in this, to be honest. That we get the piano player.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't really get to interact with the main characters in any meaningful way. He does obviously provide a lot of the atmosphere in the movie, and he plays these songs that bring up memories for the main characters, but he doesn't really
No.
He's not allowed to
Right.
have like a meaningful relationship with the main characters.
Like Rick becomes the white savior when he sells his club to the other guy. He's like, but only if you take Sam. So
Yeah.
it's a bit.
And the reason why Sam is in Morocco in the first place is because he followed Rick from Paris, I believe.
But I do like his Sam. I do like that he's in there. I mean, it's better than not having him in there.
Yeah. I read somewhere that the actor actually, he was a musician, but he didn't play the piano. And so that's his singing voice. But there's, in all of those scenes, there's someone just off camera, like actually for real playing the piano, and he's just kind of miming it.
There's so much singing in this movie. Like, I've never seen so much singing in a movie ever. And they play the Marseillaise 4 or 5 times in this movie, too.
Yeah, it's definitely a theme. I did enjoy this use of music as for so many different things, but really as a device to bring back memory and recollection. And this sort of like, we'll always have Paris sort of thing at a time when it was looking pretty dark. France had fallen to the Nazis, and it was really a nostalgic time when a lot of people would have kind of reached for that recall of better times before the war.
I wonder if Casablanca was the inspiration to use La Marseillaise in Allied. It might have been.
I gotta think it was, right? Probably.
Yeah. Here's me slowly starting to appreciate Allied because I've seen Casablanca.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd go that far.
So we gotta rate this movie.
All right. Well, how many play it once Sams for old time's sakes would you rate this movie out of 10?
I would rate this movie 9.5 played once Sams out of 10. Out of 10s? I don't know. Out of 10. Because I really, really love this movie. I can't even specifically say what I loved about it. But it's just, where other movies from this period have been kind of slow, this didn't feel slow. And I just liked the drama, I liked the characters, I liked the romance because it wasn't too in your face, and I liked basically everything else. There wasn't anything I didn't like. So that's why it gets a really high rating. How about you?
Yeah, I remember being surprised at how short the runtime was. Like, it was really tight. The storytelling was kind of like bang, bang, bang. Like, there wasn't a lot of filler. And I did find that in the main love triangle, the characters were pretty fleshed out. As we said before, Rick is kind of a fun main character to follow because we know that he's going to get a redemptive arc. We like that in a movie. And it does have kind of a happy ending. And I like the Rick and Renault relationship. I'm glad they went off together at the end of the movie. You can imagine them, having plenty more adventures. So yeah, I think I would rate this an 8 play it once Sam out of 10. I did enjoy my watching experience. I understand why it's a classic. And it was cool to see a movie about refugees in World War II that was made during World War II when the ending of the war was really uncertain.
You're so much better at explaining your like of things than I am. It's so good.
Well, thank you, I guess. Sometimes I feel like I'm just rambling, but, I'm glad that sometimes it makes sense.
Yes, it does. And I absolutely agree. Should we let people know what we're doing in the next episode?
Yeah, definitely. Next time, we are going to have a guest on again, and we're excited to talk about Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. It's going to be our first episode that kind of focuses primarily on a book and then sort of secondarily on the TV show and the movie that go with it. And Catch-22 is actually one of my favorite books, and I just reread it for the episode, and I remember what I like about it so much. So really excited to talk about that.
I am too, even though I've not finished the book. I promise I did try. I'm not being lazy. I did actually try.
You did. You made a good dent. You're right. It's a very long book. It's 500 odd pages, I think. So
yeah, it's like 621 in my Kindle version of it.
Yeah, I think paper copy is maybe around 450, but either way, it's a very long book. Thank you so much for listening. You can follow us wherever you get your podcasts. You can rate us 5 stars. You can send this tasty little episode to a friend and say, hey, listen to this tasty little episode. It's tasty. A treat just for you. You can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast. You can visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com.
And we're also on IMDb. You don't need to do anything. I just think it's so cool that we're on IMDb. So we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.